Today we learn about another German club, and one of the country's most important and one of the world's most well-supported clubs, Borussia Dortmund. I have their 2018-2019 home kit in my collection. As you can see above here, black and yellow are their home colors. That gives them the nickname the Black and Yellows. They're also known as the Prussians, Borussia being the Latin name for Prussia, the region that they're in. They're also known as BVB, as you can see on their badge here, and generally just known as Dortmund. Little nitpicky piece of trivia here is that the name Borussia does mean the Prussian region, a former German state, but the club does not take their name from that. They take it from a local brewery. This kit is a pretty good one, but I'm not going to wear it in the video since it's about as skin tight as a sausage casing on me anymore. I did have to grab one of their most famous players. Marco Reus is the name on the back, and we're going to talk about him in a second because he's very important to the club, still playing with them. As far as titles, the club have won 8 German top-flight league titles, 6 of them since the Bundesliga era began in 1963. They're also pretty successful in the German Cup competition, the DFB Pokal, having won that 5 different times. You can mark 1997 as their most successful year, seeing as they won the Champions League title that season. If you're watching them on TV or you have the opportunity to see them at a match at home, just know that their stadium and their supporters give them a huge advantage. The Westfalenstadion holds about 80,000 people, making it the biggest stadium by capacity in Germany, and it is a loud place specifically because of what is known as the Yellow Wall, which is part of one stand that goes up and up and up and up, and generally has their most raucous supporters in it, making a huge amount of noise. It's a big advantage for this club. The club hold 2 rivalries of important note, the first being the one that people outside the region and outside of Germany as a whole generally recognize the most, that being der Klassiker, or the Classic. This is Germany's most important match between Dortmund and Bayern Munich, the 2 biggest clubs in the country, as well as the 2 that are most successful in titles. Dortmund are generally the club in the last few decades that have come the closest to competing with Bayern for titles season after season. But this is not their most important match. That would be the Revier Derby. That's between Borussia Dortmund and their regional rival in Gelsenkirchen, Schalke. This I actually generally consider to be the most important match in German football. Der Klassiker has taken the front foot in recent decades because Dortmund has been most successful against Bayern Munich, while Schalke has faded off a lot, especially in the last few years because Schalke got relegated to the Zweite Bundesliga, or the second league. These 2 have been at each other's throats for about 100 years now, each one of them denting a title challenge for the other at different times. 2007 and 2019 come to mind with very, very feisty matches in those 2 seasons, being critical in each of these clubs losing a title challenge. And you may remember that the Revier Derby was the first European match back after the COVID lockdown, barring Belarus, where they didn't stop playing. 2 more key things for you to know about the club, the first being that they have a reputation for a great academy, youth system, as well as being great spotters of young talent that they bring to the club, help develop, and then will sell on for a very high transfer fee, letting them reinvest and rebuild as a club. In the last couple decades, players like Erling Haaland, Jude Bellingham, Jadon Sancho, and Giovanni Reina have come to the club, developed, and moved out for high-priced fees, with actually Jadon Sancho coming back to the club on a lifeline loan from Manchester United, where he was frozen out, as well as Giovanni Reina still being with the club, but this season being on loan out to Nottingham Forest in the English Premier League. Second is, this is one of the most widely supported clubs in the world, seeing as they have an official membership number of 190,000 people. Many of those are in Germany, but you can find them all around the world as well, which is probably how I found this random bottle opener from BVB in a thrift shop on the east side of the Big Island in Hawaii. When talking about former players from such a storied club, there's always going to be a couple you're going to leave out. I've talked about some from the more modern time already, so let me go back to the more historical ones, starting with the name that always has to come first, that being Michel Zorc. He was a central midfielder for the club. He played throughout the 90s for them. He was a homegrown player, making him pretty much emblematic of their DNA, seeing as coming through their academy, playing total 20 years within the club system, and winning titles such as the league title, cup title, Champions League, and the Intercontinental Cup that came afterwards during the 90s with them. And for most of this century, he's been their sporting director, so he's had a huge role in cultivating the young talent that I mentioned before. Second name to mention is going to be one that stings a little bit for Dortmunders because we have to talk about Robert Lewandowski. He's one of the most important players for the club this century, and the Pole is one of the greatest goal scorers that we've seen in the last couple decades. He played for a couple seasons here, winning 4 trophies with Dortmund before moving to their rivals Bayern Munich, which is where things hurt. Hopefully I can soften that blow with our third player being Matthias Sommer, who was an important player for the club in the 90s and the only man to ever win the coveted Ballon d'Or for best player in the world during a season while playing for Dortmund. He won in 1996, and as a player before coming to Dortmund, he was generally a midfielder, but Ottmar Hitzfeld, who was their manager at the time, decided to play him a little further back in the defensive sweeper position. And that change in his career was a big catalyst for why Dortmund won back-to-back titles, as well as the Champions League during his time with the club in the 1990s. And over into the current squad, first name to mention is Marco Reus. He's pretty much emblematic of the club's culture this century. He's played with them for 14 seasons. You'll remember he's the name on the back of my jersey. He's one of the great attacking talents in the history of the Bundesliga, with a stat that I can share with you that shows that, being he's one of 3 players in the history of the league that scored 100 goals, as well as given out 100 assists. With respect to the defensive players at the club, who are of very good quality, I'm going to continue by talking about just attacking players, seeing as this club is renowned for their attacking style of play. The first to mention here is Sebastian Haller. He's a striker for the club, a very good young one, and he's come to the club and had kind of a stop-start to his career here, seeing as after signing from Ajax in Amsterdam, he was diagnosed with testicular cancer, which he's beaten, and he's recently just returned from scoring the winning goal in the final of the African Cup of Nations for his home Ivory Coast. And keeping with the thread that Dortmund developed young talent, Youssoufu Moukoko is the name you need to know here. He's a striker, kind of a shorter one, but a speedy and a very, very smart player for a young age of 19. He actually already has 3 years of experience playing in the Bundesliga, seeing as he's the youngest ever player to debut, just a shade under 17 years old when he did so. So there you go, your rundown on Borussia Dortmund from Germany, and I'm sorry it took me so long to get to this one because this is one of the most important clubs in Europe.